The clock is ticking within Greece as we see the countdown of 5 days for a GREXIT or a bailout. You came here for the truth, so let me unveil that for you. This crisis for Greece, for the EU, and of course the wider world is continuing to expand every single day. I have an absolutely jam-packed episode with more information than I should be covering within one, but I just need to get to it all. I'm going to move through it as quick as possible and do this the money GPS style. Let's look at this here. We had in the previous video, I discussed how Angela Merkel and Francois Hollande were basically going to meet up and they were going to put some rules on the table, and this had to get done right away. They said, we're going to give you 24 hours to figure this out or that's it. And what happened instantly? They gave them more time. So let's look at this. The IMF Managing Director, Christine Lagarde, said she stood ready to assist Greece if requested to do so. Now, that's despite the fact that they just defaulted on their 1.55 billion euro loan. And that was due June 30th. And what happens here is the IMF said that they need 60 billion euro over the next 3 years to avoid financial collapse. So that's 60 billion of which they don't have. They couldn't even pay 1.55 billion, and over these next 3 years they're going to need 60 billion. Something's got to give at this point. Now, I don't want to get too detailed in this video here because we have so much to cover. Let's look at this here. At an emergency summit in Brussels on Tuesday, that's the one I was just talking about, representatives of the 19 euro country zone said all 28 European Union leaders would meet on Sunday to decide Greece's fate. So they convene on Tuesday saying, that's it, you only have 24 hours. And then at that meeting, they basically said, well, it's not realistic. Let's extend it off until Sunday. So now we're kicking the can down the road for another 5 days. The ECB would ensure that Greek banks had the minimum necessary liquidity to stay afloat until Sunday. We have this going on again. They're simply pumping them with cash. They allowed this to happen again. This is, in a way, it's really a bailout, and they're basically just pumping just enough blood into the economy to keep it alive. I'm going to move on to this out of the Telegraph. A nice chart here to show you this. Rising debt and a shrinking economy. That's Greece. What we have is an increase of the debt every single year practically. And then you look at the economy dying over. And what has happened here is that they're doing the same as all of the countries. When their real GDP numbers are declining, the debt increases. Yes, you can look at this chart. It actually shows it going down. I don't for a second believe that. The ECB, or the European Commission president, who has grown increasingly frustrated with the Greek government, admitted, quote, we have a GREXIT scenario prepared in detail. They're ready for this. And it's funny that they're actually using the term GREXIT now. But they're saying that they are ready to go with this. They have all the details. No, they probably don't have the drachma printed up or anything of this sort. But they're probably conducted meetings where they discuss what exactly would happen, how this all would be laid out on sort of the general terms. Let's look at this next article out of the New York Times. The situation is really critical, and unfortunately we can't exclude the black scenarios of no agreement. That's the president of the European councils. They're talking about the bankruptcy of Greece and the insolvency of its banking system. This is what I'm talking about here, how they're actually sitting down discussing what happens if they do fail. What happens if they do have to leave the Eurozone? What's going to happen? Let's talk about that. Let's discuss the plans. So they are, in fact, worried about that. Until now, I have avoided talking about deadlines. This is a former Prime Minister of Poland. But tonight I have to say it loud and clear. The final deadline ends this week. So they're actually giving some very serious demands for this, quote, 5-day deadline. So remember that this is very, very critical at this moment in history, as they say here in this article. In my book, The Money GPS, I talked about the bailouts consistently. That's one of the major themes. Bailouts, such as those during the financial crisis, always favor the insolvent banks, not the people who actually need the help. Then I talk about the fact that they printed $1.2 trillion, gave it out to the banks, and we never saw any of that money. It was all done in secret as well. The banks are completely insolvent. What is the solution to this insolvency? Well, they offer the bailout strategy where they take money from the taxpayers, and they do so indirectly. And basically, you have to pay back eventually. And they have another scenario called the bail-in, which is basically taking money from your bank accounts in order to recapitalize the banks so that the banks don't fail. It doesn't make any sense to me whatsoever, but of course, that's not what it's about. Let's look at this right here out of the Washington Post. In the eyes of the Eurogroup, the problems in Greece do really need credible reforms, and therefore we need to hear from the Greek government whether they have such reforms in mind. What they're saying here is that we want you to show up with something to put on the table. We don't want to see no reforms occurring. We want to see you cutting back on something. They're making that very, very clear. I'm going to move on to this, but basically Angela Merkel is really spearheading this right now. The German government sources said there would be no debt reduction measures offered, and that it was up to Greece, which ended negotiations with its creditors 10 days ago and called a referendum to make the next move. So what they have said here is German government, Angela Merkel, suggesting you're not getting a break from the debt you owe. Just know that is going to happen, that you are simply going to have to pay back every penny that you owe. Now, they owe billions of dollars and they do not have that money. So I don't understand what they're going to do in this situation. In light of the decision by the Greek citizens, the conditions to start negotiations on a new aid program are not met yet. That's according to Merkel's spokesman. So what they're saying is, we have nothing to go on right now, because just because you vote no doesn't mean we're just going to go ahead and just start cutting out some of the debt that you owe. So this is very, very interesting here to see what they're going to do by the time Sunday finishes. So let's go on to this here. The Financial Times said this here. Unless a miracle happens, it seems impossible that Greece will be able to return to normal operations under a balance sheet continuity. They don't have the money to pay back. That's all of what I've been saying, which makes a GREXIT more likely despite the assertions of the Greek government to the contrary. Of course, they don't want to freak anybody out. They don't want to spook anybody. They don't want any more money to be fleeing the country as it always has been. Any calculation of a GREXIT needs to take into account the practical issues of creating a new Greek currency. That process could be just as messy as this year's Greek negotiations. They're unable to do anything at this point. They took this vote and basically said, no, we don't want to do any cutbacks. Then you look at the other side of it where you're seeing the European Union, all the different countries, Angela Merkel, all these people are basically saying, we're not going to give you any pardon on your debt. So the Greek government is really pushed up against the wall. And what they do in this situation is going to be beyond me at this point, because they have to take a bailout in order to pay back what they owe. If they don't want to pay back what they owe, it seems like they might be kicked out of the Eurozone. If they do that, it is going to cause an absolute domino effect. If they take the bailout, then they are going to possibly upset their citizens. We're going to have riots in the streets. You're going to have the militarized police on the street fighting off all these protesters that are out there. And also, you'll see a lot of moral hazard that is created from this. The other countries which are in major amounts of debt are simply going to think, well, I'll just do the exact same thing Greece did. Now, I want to continue this on because we need to realize that it's not just Greece. So I want to switch gears for a moment and just look at two very quick articles. 1 in 5 Americans participates in the government assistance programs each month. 52 million people, that's 21.3% of the people in the U.S. participated in a major means-tested government assistance programs each month in 2012. That means that essentially 20% of the people, 1 in 5 Americans, are really in a state of poverty. And this is all being covered up because you have programs like the EBT, the food assistance programs, you have the food stamp programs, SNAP, and other things that are basically supporting them. They are welfare programs, social assistance programs, call them what you want, but they are basically in the same situation as Greece. They're just being covered up by unfunded liabilities. Every single year, they have trillions upon trillions upon trillions in debt that is being accumulated and somehow put off the balance sheet. They don't have to go ahead with generally accepted accounting principles, GAAP. They don't have to do that in the US or in most other countries as well. They simply put everything off balance sheet, and suddenly, well, the situation doesn't look too bad. Let's look at this last article out of the Washington Examiner. According to Harvard, we have a home ownership at a 20-year low. People can't afford the home, something statistically I bring up quite often. I believe this is a very important indicator. We could look at the rents. Basically, more people have to go and become renters at this time. They can't afford the homes. They don't want to take on additional debt simply because they are at the maximum level of debt. Then you look at the home prices, which have, since the peak, declined significantly, yet people still aren't getting in. Rents have increased. Why? Because there are more people renting. It's a simple supply and demand fundamentals, which are here. If you found this video informative, please give me a thumbs up. I want to bring out as much information as I possibly can. I hope you appreciate the fact that I just get to the data and don't ramble on and just get it to you. If I have anything important to note at the end, I always like to bring it up at that point so that you get all the information you want to right at the beginning. And then for those who want to stick around can hear me at the end babble on. Last but not least, I just wanted to mention that if you like this video, I know you'll like my book even more. It's extremely informative, and I have received such positive news about this right here. So it is really very nice to hear all of that positivity. So if you want to look through the book, you can actually go over to Amazon. They have this look inside feature, which allows you to flip through the book to see if you like it for yourself. Take care.